All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, of the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully, your favorite Chelsea podcast out there and a part of the Men in Blazers Media Network. Dan, one of your hosts here, alongside my good friend Sam. You know him as CFC Central. And this is our West Ham match preview. That's right, going up against Graham Potter's boys, who are going to try to give everything in this one to stop Chelsea from getting their first win of the new Premier League season under their belt, putting 3 points on the tally and going to the top of the table for at least a day. And Sam, we did not get our predictions correct for the Crystal Palace match review. So I think we just got to, again, put our hands up in the air and just acknowledge that. We got to continue this season, letting people know that we will take it on the chin when we don't get it right. And hope that the predictions we have at the very end of this episode, where we'll go through what do we seen from that first game of West Ham, what we could potentially expect for some of the players, some questions that Enzo Maresca might be facing, and our own predictions at the end, that we will try to do better this time.
You know what the saying goes, those who live in crystal palaces shouldn't throw stones. So yeah, just a little bummed out by that one. just a little, just a trademark way to start the podcast. And don't you of all people shouldn't spoil my vibe, please. Okay. But it's the first day of the season. So, we're world champions. There's been a little bit of a hangover from, the trophy celebration, the extremely long season. Those are all very understandable reasons. So I do think it will take a little time for us to get up to speed. Obviously, we've also replaced half of our attack, and it's one thing playing in a knockout tournament where, that 1 point is not incentivized, and then you reach the Premier League with back fives are meant to do just that. So lots to take in, lots to analyze, but yeah, lots of good things, a lot of bad things in that Palace result. But hopefully we'll be able to fine tune our predictions, make sure that, we'll be probably up to speed like 65, 70% of the way, and get a little bit of that attack clicking and all the nice things, in but what we've been basically doing for the past couple of months. Get to see that again. So fingers crossed in that one, but feeling good about this one, Dan.
I think you would have to feel good about this one if you just even watched the last game that they played against Sunderland. I mean, it was a 3-0 victory to start the season for Sunderland over West Ham. And it was not a great kind of total performance. I mean, they only had 4 shots on target, 12 total shots with 63% of the possession, like very much a Graham Potter throwback track in that one. But look, again, we're going to talk about just maybe some of the player availability. We'll talk again about that style of play, and then we'll get into strengths and weaknesses, and then talk about Maresca's issues to solve before you get into predictions. That's how we handle these match preview pods. And so just maybe off the top of it, Sam, I know you always do the homework, you do the due diligence, you make sure that we have a very fine understanding of how this team potentially is playing. Just off the top of it, with that Sunderland game, like, what's your top level analysis on how West Ham's season looks, just using that match as a microcosm?
And that's, I think, the tough part for me, because we've been able to get only one sample size, and I'm tempted to go back last season and analyze those games and to say, this is what Potter wants from West Ham, and essentially that's something that's going to continue. But I'll probably give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in terms of they're trying something new this season. But the overarching, I would say, perspective for me is that they're still stuck somewhere between, in terms of an identity crisis, going from a team that relied on a back three, has some very robust defenders in there, also had a pivot of say Rice and Suchek, and really really solid core, and then they lost Rice. Now they've gone and lost Kudus. So it just seems like a team that's slowly downgrading in terms of personnel, and then somehow trying to upgrade their style of play, going from counter-attacking back to front, stay defensively solid and then try to hit people, to we're going to try and keep the ball, we're going to try and be aggressive, press high. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a flux in terms of what your resources are versus what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's where Graham Potter is suffering a lot. So not for the first time, may I add. So I think that's from my level of analysis from one game, is that it is tough. I think he desperately needs a lot of recruitment in key areas. And so far he's not got it, and he's probably not going to get it. But he's also lost Mohamed Kudus. He's lost a couple of really good season campaigners in Aaron Cresswell. I think Sofal has also left. It just looks overall a weaker unit than it did, and performances have probably going to dip from here on. So fingers crossed that it continues for our game. But London derby, you never take anything for granted. So hopefully we go out there and do the business.
Do you think this could be a season where West Ham legitimately could go down? Or a couple other teams so bad that actually is just prevented, like they're prevented from going down because there are others that, at least from the onset in week one, look poorer than the West Ham side we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is in Sunderland. We generally saw the first game, and I was very, very impressed because they've kept, I think, three players who are used to Premier League football from their old side, from the Championship, and there were seven debutants, and it was a pretty good side. You've got Granit Xhaka, who's played in the Premier League, who has lots of experience. They picked up, I would say, one of Strasbourg's best players in the era and added him to midfield, and he was fantastic on debut. So they've got Reinaldo Maldava, who also played for Atletico Madrid and didn't quite work in Simeone's system. After a promising start, he's come in and looked very good. They also picked up one of La Liga's best defenders for a knockdown price in Omar Alderete, the Paraguayan. So he's also there. Enzo Lefebvre, somebody who we were watching in Ligue 1, and he's come in and also been like a very good part of the entire setup. Even the attack looked good. Simon Andingra played for Brighton. So recruitment has been smart. They've bought in, I think, 12 new signings this season. The entire idea is not just to try and aim for survival, because that's usually when you go down. You have to try and aim for a little higher, aim for mid-table, aim for trying to make some kind of an impact with the personnel that you have. And that's what Sunderland did. And that's what West Ham aren't doing. So I think if they don't desperately upgrade some key positions, which we'll talk about in this preview, I think there's a genuine chance you can say that they're going down.
Well, then let's transition into the conversation around just what the style of play is that they've had. And you mentioned this whole idea that they have not necessarily reinforced. We know some of the big names have gone, particularly Kudus is, I think, the most impactful of those. But Mikel Antonio would be, I think, another that would be a flag for them as someone that they have not truly replaced in this side. It does feel as if it's a personnel issue in addition to a management issue for West Ham this season, heading into how do you equip the manager if you don't necessarily give them players and you're stripping any available strong asset from the organization. It feels as if it's broadcasting a recipe for disaster. So I'll let you run into the style of play.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would start with just that. Probably the personnel issue is really well covered from you and I to start off the preview pod. I think there are creating worries in terms of, are you strong enough in certain positions? But if you go back to last season, I think they ended the season pretty decently. Easy run of fixtures to end it. I think Ipswich was their last game. Um, I would say, except Kudus, probably identical setup in terms of what they're trying to do, but the reinforcement has been minimum. And we've got two signings that have come in. There's one at left wing back, El Haji Malik Diouf, who's was quite highly rated from the people that are into scouting, and have basically talked to them and said, he was one to watch, but was outside the top 8 leagues. So, wanted one of those clubs to try and take a gamble on him, and West Ham obliged. And then you've got Mads Hermansen, who was actually Enzo Maresca's goalkeeper at Leicester. So he made a move for 16 million, I think, and then sort of like reinforced where Alphonse Areola was. But other than that, key positions, you mentioned Kudus, you mentioned Mikel Antonio, I mentioned a couple more. That's where I think they've weakened a little bit in terms of depth, in terms of experience. Potter is essentially just sticking to the back three system that he's relied on from the beginning of his tenure. So it's a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-1-2 or a 3-4-2-1, depending on how you look at it. The front three is quite, flexible in that regard, but there's a back three of very robust, defensive-minded centre backs. Max Kilman is somebody who anchors that defense. He's a boyhood Chelsea fan, somebody who's very good on the air, in the air and also on the ground. There's Jean-Claude Todibo, who came from Ligue 1. Manchester United were very eager to get him. He was strong in Nice, and I would say he's been quite indifferent at West Ham. I think he's been okay on the ground, but his numbers in terms of aerial duels, in terms of just progression, either via passing or carrying the ball, have been quite disappointing. So I don't think he's really living up to the kind of reputation he came with. And he's one to watch in terms of maybe somebody who's low on confidence. Naif Agad on the other side is quite an interesting one because he did come to West Ham, had an incredible start after he came from Rennes. Went to the World Cup with Morocco, again, did very, very well against some very good sides. And then for some inexplicable reason, he was loaned out to Sociedad last season. And Potter said, okay, probably not going to be frozen out this time. And suddenly he's back in the side. So it's three centre backs. I would say Agad is one of the quickest in there. Kilman is also good, but Agad is very, very quick. So, our attackers on the right hand side have their work cut out for them. Probably going to be quite an interesting option if you get into a foot race with him. It's going to be quite intense, and say Neto versus Agad could be quite a nice competition to see in terms of you can get past him. But interestingly, Sunderland were targeting that flank because Diouf was pushing up as much as possible at the earliest opportunity, and there were a lot of balls being played in that particular area. So that sort of defense is one to watch. Um, at wing back, you obviously everybody knows Aaron Wan-Bissaka. He's somebody who's very good defensively. I think his 1v1 prowess, which was at one point in time very legendary, I think that has waned a little bit with age. But he's somebody who's also been asked to do a lot more on the ball. He's sometimes inverting, sometimes he's making those really good breathtaking shunts from back to front and getting into crossing positions from where he's trying to put balls for Nicholas Fulcrew as a target man in the middle. Uh, the new signing I talked about, Diouf, he's a wide midfielder, a wing back. He struggled a bit, I would say, against Sunderland. Looked nervy. A first game, obviously, young guy, so probably going to have a little bit of nerves coming to the PL, but did offer some nice stuff going forward and back. Looks very athletic, but in terms of just defensive engagements, in terms of how comfortably he looked on the ball, some question marks. So that's probably something that I look out for. But some also good crosses to the near post for Nicholas Fulcrew's run. So I would say the wing backs are somebody, those two positions are there to hold with and essentially provide a lot of wide deliveries to somebody who's very capable of heading the ball in full crook. So that's what's going to be from defense.
And then it does feel as if midfield is going to, or potentially could be, kind of a flaw category for them too. Just, and they do have kind of four options there. I mean, we got Ward Prowse, Paqueta, Suchek, Guido, and all like, kind of their combination. We have people like Ward Prowse just can throw up a free kick from nowhere and end up getting you a goal. So like that is always going to be a risk and concern. But how do you feel about their midfield grouping?
I think more red flags than a communist rally, to be honest. Yeah, it does look like it's lacking in a lot of issues. I would say that that's the biggest flaw by far. Ward-Prowse, Paqueta, Suchek, Guido Rodriguez, like you mentioned, are the four options. Paqueta and Suchek have been used interchangeably as the sole player behind the two forwards. So Paqueta plays as, I would say, an 8-10. So he starts off in the number 10 position, but he sometimes slots into midfield as the third CM. He's essentially very good at linking up play. So he will try to move, back to front, left to right. He will drop horizontally, pick up those little pockets, and he will cause you issues the way Palmer does. He starts on the right, but sometimes you'll see him pop up on the left because that's where the pocket is. Given that freedom to roam around, pick up ball, he's very good at linking up play. So he's somebody who will do that, who will be a little bit of a nuisance in terms of coming up into positions where he shouldn't be. Suchek, on the other hand, is more of a he's been used as also an 8-10, but more of a support striker role. Somebody who maybe if you're a goal down, he comes in and tries to be the extra player in the box. Obviously, we know his height. We also know his aerial prowess. So that's what Graham Potter also did against Sunderland. He started off with Paqueta. He also had Guido and Ward-Prowse in the pivot. And then when things weren't going good, then Suchek came on and essentially became that extra midfielder to hit in the box. So he's their Marwan Fellaini, putting it in as succinct terms as I can. But Ward-Prowse and Guido is, I think, where Sunderland really, really had a good time because there is there's a task of trying to protect the backline with those two guys, and Guido Rodriguez is quite good at that. But Ward-Prowse is aging, doesn't quite have the legs. I think he's there for his leadership, for his organizing ability. I've read a lot about him. At his time at Southampton, was one of the leading figures in terms of setting the standards. So maybe he's there from an organization perspective. But yeah, his set pieces didn't look good, and we all know he's probably one of the best set piece takers the PL has ever seen. So you still have to be respectful of it. Please do not give him a free kick anywhere close to the box because he's hurt us from there before. So don't give him corners because there are some interesting players in the West Ham backline, and on average they are 4 centimeters taller than us. So in terms of height perspective, there is an altitude advantage there. So probably best to keep them at bay.
And then that leaves just the attack left in terms of a area that you want to kind of go into. And then I think, again, you lose Kudus. I mean, you have to go with just then the standard number 9 to really try and make something happen for this team. And I mean, that does feel as if that is a bit of a real, again, like you could point to a lot of errors and challenges with this West Ham team within not reinforcing. Striker's another one where you could imagine they would be hungry for any, halfway decent striker to kind of come into this side.
Mm-hmm. And I think the benefit is that obviously you've tried out that system before. He has continued with what was a big man, little man pairing with Nicholas Füllkrug and Jared Bowen. He did that in the last game of the season against Ipswich, I think. And Füllkrug is just this old school number 9, came from Dortmund, very, very good at just, being the reference point up front. He usually just throws himself at everything. It's one of the reasons why he essentially lost a tooth. But acrimoniously, he became the player to lose the most duels in one game since the 23-24 season when he lost 16 duels against Sunderland. I think he went 0 for 9 in the air. And then, he I think only won 3 on the ground. So quite a bad record, but expect him to be in the middle of everything. There are a lot of back to front long balls from Wan-Bissaka. The wing backs try to hit him back to front. The centre backs try to go directly to him. He will just try to create some kind of chaos and essentially knock down a second ball for either Jared Bowen or Lucas Paqueta, one of those two guys. And then from there, West Ham will try and essentially initiate whatever they can in terms of transitions. The two guys we mentioned are the wing backs who are holding the width, so they're probably not going to be in the equation, but will offer some kind of an outlet for crossing, usually wide crosses from far wide positions. They're not going to bother trying to get into the box, just whip it in at the first opportunity. But I think that's the big danger with them. It's just getting the ball to Füllkrug, trying to utilize some kind of a numerical difference in that particular situation as a 3v3 or a 4v4. I would say watch out for Josh Achimpong because that's what Mateta did as well. He tried to say, okay, he's the rookie guy coming into the PL, so try to hit me in those positions when I'm 1v1 with Achimpong, and maybe I'm going to try and make something happen. I expect Füllkrug to also do that should Tosin not be fit. So I would say if that is something that West Ham target, then Achimpong versus Füllkrug could be quite the interesting duel to watch out for from our perspective. But I think Josh did very well despite a couple of nervy moments where he gave the ball away. But I think he against one of the really good centre forwards in terms of physical aspects, in terms of just being able to provide an all-round threat from a speed and physical perspective, he did superbly well. So this will also be a very good test, but quite different, not probably from a skill perspective, but just from a bullying strength perspective, quite the education for Achimpong. So definitely one to watch.
Well, let's take our first ad break, and when we get back, we will take a look at some of those weaknesses. And again, it feels like we talked about a few of them already, just in the style of play, but there are a couple of key points that we want to highlight as well. But again, after this ad break, so stay tuned, be right back. Okay, Sam. So again, we've talked a little bit about some of these errors or these challenges that they're running into. I mean, I think the biggest thing is going just to be that like it's not toothless from an attack perspective, but it is definitely a step back without Mohamed Kudus in this team. And not just, I think, within his lack of kind of, goal scoring contribution, but just in how he helped them carry the ball and move the ball, down the pitch. Like it does feel as if they're a little more stutter stop at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you need somebody from a speed and carrying perspective, I think Kudus did provide both in abundance. Just somebody who could offer a real threat from a 1v1 perspective. Having lost that and also not having Crescencio Somerville, who they signed as also like a 1v1 threat on the other side, on the left hand side, they don't have those wingers. So I think it's been sort of difficult for them to realize how they're going to compensate in those situations. And when I was watching the game back against Sunderland, that was something that was quite prominent. Lots of promising transition chances just fizzled out because West Ham were just struggling to carry the ball up front. Most of the times, there was this ball coming out to Bowen, and he had to take on a couple of 2 or 3 players, and then essentially the ball would go out for the throw. So I think Paqueta and Bowen are going to be two guys who will offer a lot of the carrying and progressive threat in terms of passing. But other than that, the midfield doesn't really have the legs. You see Ward-Prowse and Guido Rodriguez trying to offer supporting runs, but the quality just probably isn't there. And that's something that's one to watch. I think the lack of speed could be telling. In previous seasons, it was quite difficult when you came up against them, and there was a lot of going back to front very quickly. Antonio would be a battering ram who could move. You had Bowen also, like a younger Bowen, also running at full speed. You had Kudus obviously, but this time it doesn't look that sharp in terms of going back to front. So that's something that I would mark down as probably a negative compared to last season. The second is the pivot just looks like it takes a little too many liberties, especially against Sunderland, where they were expected to have a lot of the ball. Against a more athletic midfield in Sunderland, I think they just took too many chances and didn't account for just their own shortcomings. I think Guido is a defensively robust guy, very good when he's dueling, but doesn't have the legs to sprint back. Same goes for Ward-Prowse. So there were a lot of opportunities where they were trying to, you know, compensate on one side of the pitch and just got skewed to one part. And whenever Sunderland were able to break, they caused a lot of issues. There's this one particular instance where Diarra essentially waltzed to the entire midfield, and Paqueta had to track back from the edge of the box around 40, 50 yards to try and put a foot in there, but still couldn't get there. But one guy essentially carried past the entire midfield on the break. So expect, if there's a certain kind of threat that you can do from a progressive standpoint, you should ask somebody like a Neto or even a Caicedo to try and carry as much as possible against that midfield. I think you will get a little bit of joy, especially in transition opportunities. So the pivot's athleticism, when they are not in a compact shape, I think that should be tested. And it's something we probably didn't test against Crystal Palace. So that's probably the onus is on us to prove. The third, I would say, Dan, is that we mentioned about this, lack of identity, or probably just stuck in the middle trying to figure out who we are. And it's trying to be this possession based team, trying to hog a lot of the ball, but just a glaring lack of technical ability. And we talked about the players that they've lost. I think the bar about the floor, that the technical floor that they had, just fallen shorter and shorter and lower towards the ground. So I do think that when they're trying to keep the ball, when they're trying to pass, they struggle. The pivot can't really receive back to goals. So if you pressure them, there's an issue. If you pressure the back line, it is going to be an issue. I think Hermanson's pretty good with his feet, but you pressure, say, Diouf when he's under pressure at left wing back. Juan Bissaka can be quite iffy when he gets the ball. Kilman is decent, so probably going to be okay there. But the wide centre backs again, Todibo has struggled, especially in pressure situations. So press as hard as possible, and the benefit is there. And the last is probably going to say, like, I did watch Diouf very closely, and it looked like he was struggling to match the pace of play. So as and when he's acclimatizing to the Premier League, give him every reason not to. Just try and press him, put him under pressure. Sunderland managed to do it multiple times, and there were a lot of cheap giveaways and sort of nervy passes here and there. So, try and make it as difficult for him as possible. So I think that's the individual thing that I'd probably highlight, saying when you've got aggressive players like Neto in there, just try and put a lot of, just breathe down his neck and see what gives.
Well, look, I think that takes us then to what are the things that Enzo Maresca is thinking about for this match, the tough questions that he has to answer, whether that's through the tactics, whether it's through the 11 he selects for this game. what are some of the questions? And this is your opportunity to flip the script on me here, Sam. You do so much of the heavy lifting in the first part of the pod. What's a question you think is at top of Maresca's mind when it comes to the challenges for Chelsea heading into this game?
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of questions, a lot of discourse in the public in terms of how equipped is this side to break a low block and say a back five. So I would pose this question to you the same way that I did against Palace. I asked you, how confident do you feel breaking down a back five? I would ask you the same question again, based on the 90 minutes, based on everything you've seen. How confident are you that we managed to score against West Ham?
I think I'm more confident because I think the quality of the side is lower overall comparatively. Whereas maybe, just to be fair, I mean, it is a good Crystal Palace side. I mean, we said it in the match review pod. I think we tried to kind of set some expectation for, in the preview pod, but we were a little too high on the Club World Cup victory and, what we did in this summer to maybe couch some appropriate expectations and Chelsea getting back into the swing of things. I would say I feel better about their ability to break down this West Ham team just in general, regardless of the fact if it were a back four or a back five. When you look at the performance we had against Crystal Palace and then kind of go into like, well, where happened, what happened? I mean, we ended up, that first half, we had one big chance, 11 total shots. You flipped to the second half, you had 8 total shots, one big chance, and a 1.05 expected goal to the first half, where it was a 0.56. Like, indicates to me that Chelsea have a way to create opportunity against a team with a low block. It did take a lot of time to work ourselves kind of into a solution, into a situation where we could make it happen. And I think some of that did come with the changes in who was on the pitch. So someone like Estevao was very, very interesting in the way that he was able to drive past maybe one or two defenders to create space for others to get the ball into the box. And so I think that is exciting to me. I think there's something there for Maresca, for the players to take a look at and say, we do have a couple people who are one-on-one matchup problems, who can force the conversation, who can move the ball into a difficult area in the box. Then it just becomes, how does then the second individual who's either running into the box, who's available for a header, who is coming in from the opposite side, can they actually convert the opportunity that's put forward for them? And that will be, I think, the big challenge. But did Chelsea have the players to do it? I think the answer is yes, but I think it just comes down to an execution piece.
Yeah, I think probably like the biggest question for me is just, how quickly can you get those players up to speed? I think the review board just summed it up really quickly. Obviously, there are fitness issues, but there are some certain personnel issues that a lot of us would point out in terms of, Joao Pedro has been used as a 9, but he's been used as a a double 9, not as a solitary 9. And how suited is he to lead the line by himself? And we saw it against Crystal Palace where Lacroix was just able to get close to him, snuff him out at the earliest opportunity. His runs didn't work. Probably doesn't have, the explosiveness to run in behind off the shoulder rather than just like dropping deep and making those things happen. So it'll be very interesting to see how JP fares in, I would say, in those situations against back five, especially when you've got somebody like a Kilman who's very, very good in the air, who will try to get you at the earliest opportunity. He also moves well on the ground. So he's going to be up against maybe more than one, two, or sometimes even three centre backs at one point in time. So, how do you deal with that? And the answer is, well, you either use Delap or JP. And I think right now Maresca will be pondering in terms of, would it be smarter to use certain rotations, get Delap up front, because he did create a lot of issues when he came on simply by occupying two centre backs at all times. So,
Yeah.
is he more suited to playing against these kind of sides? You look at Sunderland's goals, for example, two of them came from wide crosses. One came from, the left-hand side into the box, and Mayende was able to head it in. And then the other came from close to the right touchline with Simona Dingra crossing in and Ballard heading in. So when you've got two headers that have disrupted the centre backs, would it be wiser to use somebody who's actually played as a conventional 9? I would say Great, yeah. And Joao Pedro is fantastic in the air as well, but he's always showed his best work when he's arrived as part of the second line. So I think that's something that Maresca would probably have to do. And that's something that we've probably penciled in to say, how is Joao Pedro going to handle the responsibility of playing as the sole number 9? Is he probably going to use or move to left wing, because that might be quite the solution? Try to move him into central areas, but does that make the center even more crowded than it was against Crystal Palace, where at times there were 11 players in the center? So yeah, I think that's probably Maresca's biggest headache, trying to figure out what the side looks like against the back five, and trying to figure out solutions and not being overly reliant on Cole Palmer. So yeah, the assessment would be just 1v1 matchups. Probably we've got the quality advantage here, but will we be able to make it pay away from home? Hopefully that question is emphatically answered when it happens. So yeah, I think that would be the right way to put it. But the second question is, I think, along the same lines. We did see Jamie Gittins make his debut and,
Yeah.
last about 54 minutes. He did struggle from a physical standpoint against Milan. So I can probably understand that he's still getting up to speed, probably not at full capacity. So what are you thinking on left wing? Are you probably going with Gittins again because he's our only left winger there? Would you throw Tyreek in there or not, because he's probably heading out on loan or going to be sold? Or is there a different solution in there?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because you look at the fact that Jamie Gittins ended up getting subbed off at the 54th minute. So I think that tells you that, he probably had around 60 minutes of fitness identified in here. And like maybe Maresca just decided to pull the trigger a few minutes early to get Sevao onto the pitch. I mean, that means, a Sevao is probably viewed then as not, necessarily having a full 60 in him either. I mean, he ends up with, 36 plus a few extra minutes. So, I mean, if you're not going to be able to make it to 60, or you're not viewed yet as having 60, like you're not going to be the starter. And so if Estevao has, in training not cleared, a 60-minute kind of hurdle, like he's not going to start. So like, I think what would I like to see? I would like to see Pedro Neto on the left. I'd like to see Estevao on the right. I'd like to see, either Liam Delap or Joao Pedro up top and Cole Palmer behind them. And I think that would be really, really exciting. What probably ends up happening is Jamie Gittins is viewed as having 60 plus minutes in his tank, and he'll start on the left. We'll see Pedro Neto on the right. We'll see Joao Pedro up top would be my guess, and then Cole Palmer. And like that's going to be what it looks like. And then we'll see the subs, in the 65th minute or so will start to come in. But that just to me is like the most easy answer here. Whether I like it or not is irrelevant to I think what the reality of the situation is, which is where's the player's fitness and what does the prior match data tell us about how Maresca views or how the club potentially thinks about where the fitness of these players are currently, and the fact that they ended a game on Sunday and they're now playing a game on a Friday, which means they had 4 effective days to get ready for it. And one of those days is kind of like the rest day leading up into the game that they're going to play the following day. So like, and then one is the recovery day in there. So like, it was not a quick turn. So I think if you're looking for a massive shift in this starting 11, I don't think it's going to change dramatically. So I think the Tosin conversation is probably the only one that makes this lineup shift pretty substantially from game to game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fitness aspect of it is key, like you mentioned. Just getting probably from 55-60% to probably 80-85% will make a massive difference in performance levels. It's just the incisiveness, the way that we're able to cleave through certain teams. I think that was missing in individuals. Enzo Fernandez being a particular, I wouldn't say culprit, but somebody who did look off the pace, significantly off the pace. So I think that's the big question hounding Maresca. Like, do you start off from the bat saying, okay, Enzo probably needs a little bit of a breather, so we start with Andre and then get Enzo on in the last 30 minutes, or you just stick with conventional and try to, manage minutes from the get-go? So, I mean, Sir Alex said you always start your best players. So probably going to be the logic there. You start with whoever you can. Don't really know if Gittins is the best player on the left wing. And, against the back five, you saw him against Palace. The moment he received the ball, it took 2 seconds for him to be tripled up. Premier League teams are extremely smart in terms of they just know what you have to do. So he was tripled up on with Sarr dropping, with Munoz there, with Richards also having Kukureya, but also keeping one eye there. So having to dribble past three players is a big, big ask for a winger. So that's something that probably Maresca has to try and scrutinize. Is it just wiser to say keep him there, Kittens, or you say move Pedro Neto on the left hand side, expand the pitch even more, and get say Esteva on the right hand side, or get Cole Palmer on the right wing, push Enzo at the number 10, and then get say Andre Santos as the second pivot. Would that work? Those are, I think, a lot of permutations that could work, but obviously early on in the season, you just don't want to go experimenting with recipes that have essentially are time honored and have worked before. So I think those are the two questions, the big, big questions. Joao Pedro, you stick with what you have, play him against the big five. I think it will, like you said, but Gittins also. So the two new guys in the attack, how they fare, and what the long-term solution looks like. That would be the big, big question that I'd want answers from this weekend.
All right, we're going to take our last ad break. When we get back, it is our prediction moment here, our on the ledge predictions as well. So stay tuned. We're back. All right, Sam. So rounding out this episode, we did not do well with our predictions last time. Neither of us predicted a draw. So for the season right now, we are just an offer for the predictions we had there. Like our idea of Esteva being involved in the goal contribution didn't happen. So maybe we need to predict some non-goal activities for this one. I don't know, but maybe just off the top, you predicting the Chelsea win this time, or are you gonna maybe do something a little bit more oddball here? Or if you don't predict a Chelsea win, how are you feeling because of that?
Well, I think I will go for a comfortable Chelsea win. I think I will go for maybe a 2-0. I'll go with something conservative, or I do think it could be even more than that, but I will go with 2-0. Just feels like, based on what I've seen against Sunderland, based on what I'm hearing from Graham Potter, just seems very familiar to me. Sometimes the light at the end of the tunnel is a train, and seems a lot like with West Ham right now. So I hope it doesn't come back to bite me, but it does look like a team that's very low on morale, doesn't really have the resources to cope, and looks like there's a manager there who can't really pull you from the scruff of your neck and make you march when your legs want to give away. So I'll go with that. What about you? How are you feeling about this one?
I'm feeling better about this one only because of, I think, what we saw in the Sunderland game against West Ham. And then the fact that, like, it wasn't all bad. It just wasn't a very fit performance from this Chelsea side against a very, I think, more informed and up for it Crystal Palace team than many of us anticipated. And so I think with that in mind, I do feel better about where this Chelsea team is at and where they will be. I also acknowledge that maybe the slow start could linger into this game potentially with the short term. So I'm going to couch my maybe more aggressive type of enthusiasm, and I'll just take a 1-0 victory. I think that is, I'd love to see more. I'd love to be more optimistic about it, but I'm gonna pull myself back a little bit on this one, be a little bit more realistic on just getting a win, getting a victory, getting a nice goal would do so much for this Chelsea team heading into that next game.
Mm-hmm. And you need to tell me your on the ledge prediction for this one. What are you thinking?
Ooh, well, I think it's going to be one of those games where we actually score early, and then it is a very long and annoying rest of the game to prevent the inevitable collapse. And I think if it's an early goal, that we might see Pedro Neto get the first Premier League goal for Chelsea for the start of the 25-26 campaign.
And I think that's a really good bet to have. I think he's been showing really good flashes since the Club World Cup. So long overdue a goal or an assist. So I would probably put my money on that as well, because we did point out that the left side is a little wonky for West Ham. So I would probably go similar as well. I would probably go a little further up than you and say there's going to be an error from Doof that leads to a big chance or a goal,
Oh,
hopefully.
okay.
And I do think that if a goal comes, it comes from his flank and probably through a cross, maybe to Delap, maybe to Joao Pedro, maybe, I mean, we've seen Joao Pedro score from a Pedro Neto cross in the friendly. So I think similar from that flank. So I would say that's a very specific prediction, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it comes
Look,
true.
I love a specific prediction. So again, like we absolutely put ourselves on the ledge. We're looking forward to when we go into YouTube later, when we go into the comments, we see the people who like the video, we see you commenting on. We really appreciate that. Always helps people engage, find the podcast. We really appreciate that. I will be interested to see what a couple of those on the ledge predictions are from some of the listeners and viewers of the podcast. But look, that's going to do it for this one. This is your West Ham match preview. It is on a Friday. So hopefully Chelsea win, do the business, go top of the table in the Premier League for at least a few days so that we can enjoy lauding and over other teams. But don't forget, at the start of the season, if you haven't done so before and you listen on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, a 5-star review is always appreciated. In our show notes, you can also find information about our free weekly newsletter, the London Blue Dispatch, that Sam writes. You also can find out how to get involved in our Discord community in either a paid or free capacity as well, too. But that's going to do it for this episode. So thank you so much for watching and listening. And until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.